For some time now, a growing number of people have been asking us in local government just how polluted is the air that we breathe and what can be done about it. 3 years ago, local authorities were given a series of new tasks to improve air quality conditions in each of our areas as our part in the government's National Air Quality Strategy. These were: first, to compare the current levels of 7 of the main air pollutants with national and health-based standards set by the government. Second, to find out whether our air was likely to meet these standards by the target date of the year 2005. And then third, to take action if our air quality was likely to fail those standards. This short video explains how the 33 local councils in London have gone about this, what we have found, and what is going to happen next to improve the quality of London's air. Some of the old air pollution problems, smoke from coal fires and lead from petrol, have been solved. These sources of the pollutants are no longer significant in London. But there are other pollutants coming from the exhaust pipes of motor vehicles which are still a problem. And this is despite all the work on cleaner engines and the improved fuels that are now available, and the stricter regulations on new vehicles being introduced. These pollutants are gases like carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and worst in terms of health effects, very small particles in the air, small enough to be breathed deep into our lungs. These particles are technically known as PM10s, and together these pollutants tend to be worst in busy streets where air pollution is most noticeable.
Well, the air pollution here in London can be pretty bad sometimes, especially when it's quite hot, because there's too much traffic in London.
It's pretty bad. It's not the worst place that I've ever been for pollution, but you can see here in Trafalgar Square, I mean, there's quite a lot of traffic around.
Traffic here is terrible. It's hazy as hell. Just flying in, you can see the pollution. It's just a big city pollution. I'm from New Zealand, so I don't get that back home. It's pretty clean.
I think there are too many cars around here. So if they can cut down on that.
Absolutely, it takes ages to get anywhere, and it's, you know, the air is thick with traffic fumes.
It's much quicker getting around London on a push bike, and much more convenient, much more efficient.
Just as my first day in London, so I can smell it. It smells terrible. Yeah, I'd rather not live here, quietly.
I'm actually a cyclist, so I get my lungs full of the stuff every time I cycle into work, and in summer particularly, you know, it is really a bad problem.
I think it's gradually getting worse as time progresses. Certainly as a non-smoker, my chest in this sort of weather, it's dreadful.
There's enough public transport here, buses, underground. Why is all these cars necessary in town? You know, it's the personal traffic, the cars, not the public transport that's doing this.
Most of the pollution in London comes from vehicles on the roads. They contribute about 90% of the nitrogen dioxide and carbon monoxide in the street, and about 2/3 of those small particles. But of course that doesn't mean we can ignore other sources of pollution. Oil-fired power stations and industrial processes make a major contribution to some pollutants like sulfur dioxide, and have to be tackled too.
There are now around 70 air pollution monitoring stations throughout London, like this one, measuring the range of pollutants targeted by the government's air quality strategy. We use the latest technology to give us hour-by-hour measurements of the main problem pollutants. That's nitrogen dioxide and PM10, the small particles in the air, as well as some of the other pollutants in the strategy. These measurements are coordinated into a London-wide air quality network. As a result of these measurements, we know that air quality in many parts of London regularly fails to meet the government's standards for nitrogen dioxide and small particles.
So, we know that air quality is a concern today, but how do we know what air pollution levels will be like in the future? For a start, we know that air quality in towns and cities will improve in the next 4 to 5 years for a number of reasons. As I suggested earlier, standards on vehicle emissions and fuels have been tightened throughout Europe, which means that new cars and lorries will cause less pollution in the future. And many companies are already buying cleaner vehicles or fitting their existing fleets with technical modifications to help reduce pollution. But will these improvements be enough to meet the government's air quality standards on their own? Local councils have been working together using computer models to calculate what air pollution levels will be like in 2005. These models are extremely sophisticated computer programs that use information on all the sources of pollution emissions in London, including traffic, industry and even domestic central heating. From this we've produced maps showing what levels of pollution we expect to see in 2005.
And these maps show that on current trends in some parts of London, particularly in the centre and on busy roads like this, pollution levels will still exceed the national standards. Local councils will have to declare these parts as air quality management areas and then draw up action plans detailing what measures need to be taken in order to achieve the national standards within the air quality management areas.
So, what action are we likely to see in these new air quality management areas? And what impact will they have on those of us who live and work in London? There are a range of options. Some councils are developing plans for low emission zones for polluted areas, where only the cleanest vehicles will be allowed to go. Councils are likely to be given powers to do roadside exhaust testing, identifying vehicles emitting excessive amounts of pollution, imposing fines, and so encouraging drivers to keep their vehicles well maintained to minimise pollution. Councils are also implementing more safe routes to school to enable pupils to walk or cycle to school in greater safety, and working with businesses to introduce green travel plans aimed at reducing the number of people who travel to work by car. Steps are being taken to make attractive and affordable alternatives to using the car available to all, from measures such as creating safe cycleways to investing in a modernised underground railway and a better bus system, and even new trams. We will also need to think about the more long-term measures needed to tackle pollution in the new air quality management areas. The government and local councils have already introduced planning policies that help reduce the need to travel by encouraging more housing in urban areas with good public transport links, so that people don't have to rely on a car. The Environment Agency is working with industry to keep emissions from industrial chimneys within the air quality targets. And London's new mayor also has a major role to play. The mayor has responsibility for environmental quality and will be producing an air quality strategy for London. The mayor also has powers to introduce policies throughout London on charging vehicles going into congested areas and putting a levy on workplace parking. This money can be used to improve public transport in London. But does it really matter that much if we don't manage to reduce pollution levels and meet these air quality targets by 2005? Some people argue that London's air is clean enough already and no more needs to be done.
The scientific evidence is good that air pollution affects health, for example with breathing difficulties, heart problems and even cancer. The most vulnerable people are children and the elderly, particularly those who already have heart or lung disease. The government has estimated that 24,000 people in Britain die prematurely each year because of air pollution. In busy hospitals, like here in Paddington, doctors regularly see people with problems made worse by high pollution. It's important to meet air pollution targets if we are to improve the health of people who live or work in towns and cities. If we could reduce the amount of traffic, roads would be more pleasant places to be. If more people would cycle or walk instead of using cars, they themselves would be exposed to less air pollution. They would also reduce their risk of heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure and other diseases.
We'd all like cleaner air, so when you can, leave your car and walk.
Drama was Coppalucci of Italy.
Clean air. Are you doing your bit?
So that's the challenge. The next step is to develop action plans to deliver cleaner air for Londoners. We've already seen some of the measures that are going to be taken and which will be in those plans in the next few months. In fact, air quality action plans will need a range of measures matching solutions to the particular problems of each local area. But most important of all, though, these plans need the active support and agreement of all those who live and work and do business in London. That's why we're asking your views on what should go into the plans. Together, we can deliver cleaner air for London.